I'm going to show you around. Okay.
Some rather simple-minded critics read him as shock for shock's sake, but his devotees hear something much more profound. A moralist in leather who is using glamour to smuggle in brutality, tenderness, and elegant contempt for good taste. If you've ever dismissed Rick Owens as just boots and theatrics, you've missed the point. He's selling discipline, ironically disguised as decadence. The scandal really is the misread. Rick Owens is the soft-spoken introvert behind some of the most outrageous spectacles in fashion. He sent male models down the runway in Paris wearing outfits with peepholes, female models with other women strapped to them as living human backpacks. Rick Owens has been called a fascist, a nihilist, a pornographer of poverty, and he's worn every insult like a medal. Rick's influence extends far beyond shock value, and for someone who prefers to remain low-key, Rick has an uncanny way of making the whole world sit up and pay attention. Copy, even. If you only have 30 seconds, here's the bottom line of this video. He became the face of subversive fashion by turning the bizarre and extreme into objects of desire. He took the freakish things polite society might snicker at and made them aspirational. And he personally lives every inch of his brand. He even transformed himself from a self-destructive glam punk into a disciplined Zen-like artisan without ever losing his rebellious edge. In short, Rick mastered the art of contradiction. He married grunge with glamour, excess with restraint, and built a world where being weird and even a bit ugly is the ultimate statement of cool. But if you'd like a bit more of an explanation, follow me. There's a lot more to unpack in this story.
Welcome. I'm Kira, and this is your beauty blueprint.
And if you fancy someone and don't like what they're wearing, does it kill your attraction to them?
Absolutely not. It almost perks it up.
I've spent a whole week researching, watching, and editing all things Rick Owens to bring you his very essence and share the best of my findings. Now, what are the key ingredients of his unique and instantly recognizable persona? We're talking about a man whose wild, drug-fueled early years eventually gave way to almost monastic self-discipline. A designer who can be both scandalous and sincere, playful and profound. It's going to get a little scandalous, so stick around. And by the end of this video, we'll even serve up a quick breakdown of what we can learn, very, very practically speaking, from Rick's unique style universe. So, settle in, maybe grab a strong charcoal black coffee. Something tells me Rick would approve. And let's start our analysis by understanding who Rick Owens actually was, and how he came to be the face of modern avant-garde in fashion. Here's a little backstory. Rick Owens was born Richard Saturnino Owens in 1961 in the small conservative town of Porterville, California. As an only child raised in a strict Catholic household by a Mexican mother and American father, young Rick grew up an outsider. He has described himself as a sensitive boy in a small town who was expected to butch it up to fit in. He couldn't be flamboyant or feminine in that environment, an experience he found humiliating, but one that fueled a quiet rebellion inside him. He later laughed, "I'm a Los Angeles cliché. I had a conservative, controlled childhood, then became as uncontrolled as I could, and then realized that I liked control after all." In other words, his life followed a classic rock and roll trajectory. Repression, explosion, then some kind of redemption. As soon as he could, Rick fled Porterville for Los Angeles to attend art school, and there he let his pent-up creativity roar to life.
I went to Los Angeles to be an artist. I went to a art school to learn to be a painter, and I did that for 2 years, and it was nice. I mean, I really enjoyed it, but it was very intimidating. It was painting seemed like a priesthood. I had to have intellectual rigor that I was intimidated by, and I didn't really know if I had the stamina, the intellectual stamina to really follow it through.
He wore platform boots, capes, full makeup, embraced every theatrical flourish that had been denied to him back home. The early 80s LA scene was a playground for an artsy misfit like Rick, but it was also crawling with temptations. Like his punk idols, Rick dove headlong into the excesses of the time. For years, he indulged heavily in drugs and alcohol, mostly methamphetamine, cocaine, and vodka, in quantities that nearly killed him before he quit cold turkey in the early 90s. Kids that were too controlled became drug addicts and alcoholics before finding spirituality in Zen. It's so common. I'm totally common, he reflects wryly. Rick's eventual turn to sobriety and discipline is one of the defining aspects of his personal evolution, but two other life-changing things happened in those LA years. First, he fell in love with an enigmatic French woman named Michèle Lamy, a figure as outlandish and extroverted as Rick was introspective. Michèle was a good 2 decades older and cut a witchy, mesmerizing figure with her henna-tattooed fingers, stacks of bangles, gold teeth, and a trail of musky perfume. She ran a notorious nightclub-cum-bohemian salon on Hollywood Boulevard and had her own clothing line. Rick originally worked for her, designed patterns for her Lamy brand in the late 80s. They became an unlikely duo and eventually life partners, really complementing each other. Rick calls Michèle his muse and even jokingly described their partnership as asking a gypsy to organize a war with a fascist. Her free-spirited, instinctive approach is balancing his pragmatic, methodical side. I'm so fascinated by someone who acts completely on instinct and feelings, where I'm so pragmatic and sensible. Compared to her, I'm boring and conservative, he said. I already told all about their meeting and chemistry build in my video about Michèle. Do check it out, if you haven't already. The two built what would become the Rick Owens empire, Owenscorp. They eventually married in 2006, even though by then their creative and business bond was long sealed. And the second pivotal development in those years was, of course, the birth of the Rick Owens, the fashion label. In 1994, while working out of a tiny store off Hollywood Boulevard, Rick launched his own gritty line. Early on, he mostly made what he knew, leather jackets, perfectly fitted, distressed in all the right places, along with bias-cut tunics, draped tanks, and gloriously threadbare t-shirts. He once coined the term glunge, glamour plus grunge, to describe all this. Imagine the elegance of a classic movie goddess, but dragged through a back alley punk club. That was the vibe. It was raw and refined at once, and it attracted a cult following almost immediately. By the late 90s, in-the-know stars like Courtney Love and Madonna were wearing Rick Owens. You would know someone was cool because they were wearing Rick Owens, Courtney Love later said of his early designs. Still, Rick operated on fashion's fringe until a serendipitous moment catapulted him into the real spotlight. In 2002, Kate Moss was photographed for French Vogue in one of Rick's signature biker jackets, a sleek, diagonal zipped leather that radiated underground chic. The image caught the eye of Vogue's editor-in-chief Anna Wintour, who then sponsored Owens' debut runway show in New York that year. That show, titled Sparrows, marked Rick's arrival on the global stage. After over a decade, mind you, of toiling in semi-obscurity, Rick suddenly had the establishment's full attention. Not long after, in 2003, Rick and Michèle decided to relocate from Los Angeles to Paris, a move partly prompted by a violent mugging incident in LA that left Rick rattled and ready for a change of scenery. Paris embraced the strange American with open arms. He set up his studio and home inside a raw 5-story mansion on the historic Place du Palais Bourbon, famously gut-renovating it to match his austere taste. By 2004, Rick and Michèle had formed their own company, Owenscorp, to house not only the fashion line, but a burgeoning furniture line and other design projects. In typically cheeky fashion, they described their odd couple business dynamic in militaristic terms. The intuitive gypsy and the control freak fascist plotting creative conquest together. Throughout the 2000s, Rick's reputation grew steadily as the dark horse of high fashion. He won over Parisian tastemakers, no easy feat for an outsider. Or anyone, really. French critics lauded his designs, French editors splashed his work in magazines, and French clients snapped up his clothes with religious fervor. All this was happening even as Rick steadfastly refused to play the typical fashion game. He gave almost no interviews and hired no publicist at all. When he received a prestigious National Design Award in 2007, he turned up in his uniform of black leather and mumbled a tiny thank you speech, then slipped back into the shadows. The shyness and indifference, paradoxically, only made the industry love him more. By the 2000s, Rick Owens had become both an institution and an iconoclast, if that's possible. He expanded his brand to include the dark shadow diffusion line, denim and streetwear with Rick's twist, a furniture collection of imposing geometric pieces, and various creative collaborations. But what really fueled the legend of Rick Owens were his runway shows in Paris. Theatrical happenings that people would gossip about for weeks after. Rick doesn't churn out cookie-cutter runway productions, as you can see. He treats each show like performance art, often with a subversive message or a surreal twist. In 2013, for example, instead of the usual cast of waif models, he presented his collection on a team of athletic step dancers from an African-American sorority who stomped and shouted in unison in his clothes. The spectacle was unlike anything the po-faced Paris fashion crowd had seen. Then came 2015, the year Owens truly cemented his reputation as fashion's provocateur-in-chief. In January 2015, during the men's fall show, he quietly slipped an unprecedented detail into 4 of his outfits. Each had a fabric flap cut just so, allowing the models' genitals to be on full display as they walked. The revelation, a flesh of flesh presented subtly in an otherwise typically dramatic drapey collection, as one report described it, caused a stir even among the jaded front-row editors. Whispers and giggles rippled through the crowd as they realized a long-standing taboo was being shattered. Right there and then. Instagram promptly dubbed the moment #DickOwens, and the media went into a frenzy. Rick, for his part, defended the full frontal statement as an homage to classical statues. After all, he walked past marble nudes in Paris parks every day, and to him, the peak holes were a modern wink to antiquity's casual and even dignified nudity. High-minded critics actually praised the audacity, while some tabloids simply howled in delight at the shock factor. Rick had done it again. Blurred the line between elegance and indecency in a way only he could. Just when you thought a surprise penis or 4 might be the wildest thing he'd do, Rick topped himself later that same year. For his women's spring 2016 show, he sent models out carrying other models upside down, strapped to their bodies like bizarre backpacks, limbs tangled, hair swinging. The imagery was unsettling yet strangely beautiful. Rick explained it as a tribute to female strength and the bonds between women, quite literally, women supporting women. Rick had managed to create a runway show that was equal parts art installation, feminist commentary, and some very dark humor. And crucially, everyone was talking about it. Again. Not all of Rick's runway drama was carefully planned, however. Also, in 2015, one of his longtime male models brazenly went rogue during a show, holding up a hand-drawn sign reading, "Please kill Angela Merkel not." The bizarre pseudo-threat had nothing to do with Owens' intended theme and instantly cast a pall of confusion and controversy. Backstage, the usually reserved Rick Owens lost his cool. He actually punched the renegade model in a flash of anger. "I thought, hey, this is my spotlight, and you fucked it up," he explained. While Rick is never one to shy away from provocation, he made it clear that particular message crossed a line. "I don't even mind drama, but I don't like death threats," he quipped dryly. The incident only added to his mythos. Here was the Dark Lord of fashion. By now, almost half a century into his career, Rick Owens had every accolade a designer could dream of. Even pop culture superstars were following his lead. Kanye West, for one, built much of his early Yeezy brand off of the Rick Owens template of drapey, neutral-toned layers and dystopian flair. What's important is that Rick achieved this not by courting the mainstream, but by doing his own thing. Rick Owens' silhouette is often described as monastic and apocalyptic. Rick created an aesthetic universe all his own, one that felt detached from passing fads and seasonal changes. He even likened the consistent, hypnotic quality of his work to a Lou Reed song. Minimal chord changes and direct monotony as virtue in a world obsessed with the next new thing. Psst, do you like this so far? If you do, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps me bring you more deep dives into icons like this. And tell me in the comments, would you or have you ever worn any of Rick Owens' designs? I'm super curious. Huge thank you to our lovely channel members as well. Your support means everything. If you'd like to join as a member, you'll get access to members-only podcast episodes, our custom emojis and badges next to your name. Oh, and by the way, for this video's launch, I've designed a limited edition Rick-inspired t-shirt for us. Well, beyond the runways and the retail success, what really sets Rick Owens apart is the persona he very carefully crafted, or perhaps the one he's naturally grown into over all of these years. And it's a persona built on the power of contrast. Think about it. Rick is known as the Lord of Darkness in fashion, yet in person he comes across as gentle, thoughtful, even shy. He cuts an imposing figure with his long black hair, gym-pumped body, but then he'll speak in a soft voice and shyly thank everyone for their time. Culturally speaking, one could say he embodies a Jungian shadow archetype. He represents the dark, repressed aspects of style and self-expression that most designers shy away from. He brings them to light on his runways, invites us to acknowledge beauty in what's strange or taboo. One might see Rick Owens as a kind of modern pagan priest of fashion, a shaman who mixes the Apollonian and the Dionysian. On one hand, he has Apollonian discipline. Just look at the fact that he lives clean and works out religiously. On the other, he serves up Dionysian chaos and excess in his shows. Violence, nudity, ritualistic spectacle. That blend of control and surrender, of classical influence and punk rock anarchy, makes his work feel almost elemental. Rick himself has said that the world he presents is not a manifesto, it's a proposal, meant to be gentle. He's offering an alternative vision of beauty, never forcing it on anyone. That paradox, the fierce-looking outsider who, deep down, wants to create a gentle, inclusive space for all the other outsiders, is what makes Rick Owens such a fascinating figure. Importantly, Rick's persona and philosophy aren't an act or marketing gimmick. They're rooted in how he actually lives his life. Case in point, his discipline. After he gave up drinking and drugs, Rick funneled his addictive energies into fitness and work. He's even said, famously, working out is couture. No outfit is going to make you look or feel as good as having a fit body. Buy less clothing and go to the gym instead. That quote might sound odd coming from a man who sells $3,000 jackets, but it encapsulates his whole ethos. Rick transformed his own body over the years. He went from a skinny, pale club kid to a remarkably toned, muscular man in his 60s, often proudly bearing his chest in editorial shoots. I have always worn a uniform. I changed my body instead. That is much more hardcore than changing an outfit, he's noted. In other words, he became the sculpture. This idea that personal style starts with sculpting yourself and feeling right in your skin is a cornerstone of the Rick Owens blueprint. He also espouses a kind of anti-fashion honesty. The coolest thing is when you don't care about being cool anymore. Indifference is the greatest aphrodisiac. That's what really sums up style for me, Rick said. That nonchalant confidence, that indifference, defines him. He isn't chasing approval. In fact, he often does the opposite of what's expected of him. And paradoxically, that's what made him cool in the eyes of the world. Rick values humor and vulnerability as well. Despite the heavy apocalyptic aesthetics, there's always a wink somewhere. Humor is one of the most elegant things in the entire universe. He insists, and you can see that playful self-awareness in, say, naming a show Sphinx and sending out clothes with literal peepholes. As for vulnerability, he doesn't shy from it, he highlights it. That moment of full nudity on the runway was, in a strange way, about vulnerability. He believes allowing yourself to be vulnerable is attractive. In an industry built on making people feel not good enough, Rick stands out by saying, be honest, be open, be unguarded. There's beauty in that. Another striking thing about Rick Owens' character is how consistent he has been over time. He found his voice and he has stayed true to it. I am fed up with stuff that isn't perfect. I am going to be as refined and elegant as I can, he once declared. That pursuit of a personal ideal, without wavering to chase every new trend, gives his work a sense of integrity. Whether it's the clothes, the furniture, or just the way he and Michèle present themselves, there is a clear vision at work, a through line from the beginning of his career to now. So, practically speaking, what can we take away from the Rick Owens experience? Here's a quick beauty blueprint, Rick Owens style. 1. Find your uniform and make it personal. Rick found a look that worked for him, and he's stuck with it for decades. Consider streamlining your own wardrobe to a few silhouettes or colors that make you feel strong and you. It might be a signature jacket, a certain cut of dress, or even just a color you wear almost every day. Having a go-to uniform can actually make you feel more confident, because it's like armor you know intimately. 2. Embrace a neutral or monochrome palette. Rick proves you don't need loud prints or bright colors to make a statement. You could try dialing back the colors in your closet and see how it feels. Maybe play with all black outfits or a cohesive scheme. It can come off very chic and intentional, plus it makes mixing and matching a lot easier. 3. Play with proportions. One trademark of Rick's look is unusual proportions, long draped tops with snug bottoms, or huge platform shoes with otherwise streamlined outfits. Don't be afraid to experiment with shape. Pushing the silhouette a touch beyond the comfort zone can create that delicious avant-garde flair. 4. Invest in quality and care. Rick's clothes, while dark and distressed looking, are actually made of very luxe materials and crafted to last. And he famously includes big interior pockets in jackets. Big enough to store a book and a sandwich and a passport. Practical. The takeaway, whatever your style, choose a few well-made pieces that feel good on you and treat them as your wardrobe foundation. And don't forget the Rick rule. Take care of yourself even more than you take care of your clothes. A healthy body and good posture will make any outfit look 10 times better. That's the Owens mantra. 5. Own your flaws and quirks. Perhaps the most inspiring lesson from Rick Owens is to make your perceived weaknesses into strengths. He was a shy, effeminate kid who couldn't fit in, and he turned that into a fashion language that celebrates misfits and freaks. In fact, he uses the word freak as the highest compliment. So if you have something that sets you apart, be it a physical trait, a personal story, a nerdy interest, incorporate it into your style or life with pride. Unconventional beauty is still beauty. Rick's runway has featured people of all shapes, ages, and sizes in an industry that typically prefers uniform perfection. Take a page from that. Whatever makes you you, run with it unapologetically. At the end of the day, Rick Owens' blueprint isn't about dressing everyone in goth glam attire, it's about encouraging real, true self-expression. He shows that elegance can come from odd places, that there's poetry in the unconventional. He once said, "If I can make weirdness aspirational, I will have done what I set out to do." The takeaway for us is to let go of the fear of not fitting in, and instead cultivate the things that make us interesting. And perhaps the most beautiful irony of Rick Owens' story is that this once marginal outsider ended up redefining the core of fashion insider style. The quiet kid from Porterville built an empire by trusting his inner voice. There's a lesson in that for all of us. I've queued up the next chapter for you here. I'll see you soon. Love, Kira. Now go create your own blueprint.